Hi everyone, welcome to the third Thoughts on Thursday series with the GrowthWorks Network. Really excited to have so many of you back again. I've been really looking forward to this session to get the owner perspective, not just on the crisis, but on the recovery. I think as operators, marketeers, salespeople, HR leaders, and of course, early career leaders, we've all been thinking about our own jobs and supporting our teams and what to do next. But I think it's fascinating to step back and think, well, what's actually happening with those real estate owners? These people who are betting hundreds of millions of dollars on the hospitality industry for the long term. How are they thinking right now? What are they planning? And of course, what do they need from us as early career and middle management and senior leaders in the industry? So I'm delighted that Mihir can spare the time to join us. Mihir is based out in Asia, running a real estate company that own Taj, Accor, and Hilton brands. I'm sure he will share a bit more of that with us, but we're delighted to have him with us to present. So Mihir, over to you.
James, thanks. It's a great forum to get going, and I'm keen to share my views, because I think everyone looks at it from what are the operators doing, what's happening with the employees, what does recovery look like, what's the OTA market going to be like, so a lot of questions around that. But I think a lot of questions that have been missed out in all of this is, what's EBITDA, what's IRR, what's recovery, what's happening with debt service cover ratios, all of those issues, right? Which I think the broader community is missing out on. So I thought it's a great initiative to at least have that discussion and put our thoughts out as what did we do as owners and what do we see happening going forward. So we are an integrated asset management equity investor. We actively asset manage our properties as well as take an equity position in the properties that we asset manage. So just to give you an overview on the next slide is what we do. So it's basically start to finish management of transaction as well. In certain instances, we haven't invested and we actively asset manage more. In certain aspects, we remain as development managers only. And in this particular instance, where we are going to share with you our experience as owners, we also have an equity investment in these three assets. So quickly moving forward to our portfolio, it's currently 3-asset portfolio, which is largely in India. There's a Hilton Garden Inn, which is 135 rooms, 1 all-day dining, 1 bar, gym, health club, select service largely. And this is in Trivandrum in South India. The second hotel is in Cochin, which is also in South India, Kerala. And that's a 140-room Novotel full service. And the third is a destination resort, 56 suites on the coast of South India, overlooking the Arabian Sea on a beachfront. So we'll tell you what we did. This largely lays out the pandemic timeline as it played out and what we saw happening and actually what we did and what we continue to do. So incidentally, in January is when the initial reports started coming out of China. I remember I was getting on a flight from Singapore to London mid-Jan, end of Jan 23rd. And I thought to myself, God, what's going on, right? Are we the only guys wearing a mask on a flight and no one else was, right? And maybe we thought nothing would happen out of it, right? Maybe another SARS. I came back to London in Feb. There were yet travel advisories now coming out of Southeast Asia, Singapore. And on our flight, at least, most of the passengers were wearing some form of mask. In London, nothing at all. Right? So we started thinking, maybe there's something wrong. The Europeans don't get it. Right? Anyway, we started looking at these. We started looking at data coming out of China. We started looking at what things were happening in Southeast Asia, and then we started looking at what we needed to do for our hotels in India. So if you go to the next slide, I'll give you an overview of what we started doing and what our decision matrix looked like. So we clearly had three issues to tackle. One was, what were our mitigation plans going to be? How are we going to manage cash flow? And how are we going to derive efficiencies going forward? So whatever we did from that point onwards, from Feb onwards, really addressed these three key fundamental points. And every decision that was made around these three issues. So if we go to the next slide, owning company actions, that really lays out what we started doing in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And very quickly we got onto the bandwagon and we realized that this is going to be here to stay. So let's take some decisions then. And as we started taking decisions, the situation started changing and we started making further decisions. So this is a rolling plan essentially, but it largely lays out what we started doing right from Feb onwards. We said, look, we are not going to hire, we'll defer hiring for 3 to 6 months. We will start utilizing paid leave by June 2020 needs to be extinguished. Any travel-related trainings need to be postponed. Credit policies were reviewed and focus on reducing reducing accounts receivable so that your cash flow goes up. Right? And quickly in Feb, we started seeing an impact where our markets out of Southeast Asia started canceling. And then we realized that, if these guys are canceling, this is going to snowball. And unfortunately it did. And then in March, we actually stopped all hiring. And in fact, we rescinded a couple of offers that we had sent out actually at corporate office level. So those offers were pulled back. Any pay increases were deferred permanently, or at least until the end of the year. We started closing outlets, we started limiting services, we closed gyms, business centers, spas, swimming pools. All operating expenses were curtailed in terms of any related items which needed to be bought for operating reasons were put on hold. All capex at standstill, and we started closing off floors and wings. That's what we started doing. And by the time we came into end of March, literally, India had shut down. So India had announced a phased approach. They said we're going to close down movement, it's going to be restricted. And then we saw the occupancy literally plummeting. So in April, occupancy in March, so in February, we were at 85% occupancy. March, we were at 78% occupancy. By the time we got to April, occupancy had dipped to 23%. And that was rapid dip, right? They said, this is unsustainable. We need to look at things from a cash flow perspective. What are we going to do? So we started renegotiating all AMCs, either for price reduction or extension of tenor on the same price. So a lot of the AMCs were actually, their tenor was increased by almost 6 months. So we went from a 12-month AMC contract to an 18 months for the same price without increasing price. We terminated all outsourced services. We renegotiated operator fixed fee components with all our brands. And in fact, the brands also came back to the owner community and said that we are going to defer certain, or we are going to actually stand still certain fees, which was great. We received brand standard waivers. As you know, in management contracts, some of you may not be aware or may be aware that the owner is also required to set aside a certain component of the income towards furniture, fixtures, and equipment fund replenishment over the years. And that is into a separate account, which is only used for FF&E. So we negotiated the use of FF&E account, funds lying in those accounts, so that we don't have to go in for capital working loans, right? And we either partially or fully suspended operations. In fact, for our resort hotel, we quickly came to the decision that we will not operate, and we've kept that resort closed right until the end of September. Whereas the other hotels went into partial operations. That's what we did, these 2-3 months on a regular, quick call, decisive action, resulting in a lot of heartburn for a lot of people. But it really, really managed to keep us afloat. Next slide. So what were the challenges that we were dealing with, right? You have to understand that it was unprecedented, never seen before. Maybe the last time something like this happened on a global basis was the Spanish flu. But no one had any answers to this, right? So all stakeholders impacted: investors, employees, guests, suppliers, brand, government. Compounding this was that uneven response by all governments. So you had America doing something totally different. UK, earlier saying we will go for masks or herd immunity. Singapore going into lockdown. Challenging issues all over, right? India, different approaches. So everyone was caught in the bind, didn't know what to do. Haphazard travel restrictions. So if you went into Australia, or people came out of Australia, they said, hey, if you're not a citizen, you can't come into the country. India closed its borders. They said if you're a non-Indian citizen, you can't come in. If you're an Indian citizen, you can't come in. So a lot of challenges, right? Then specifically from an Indian government standpoint, limited support or no support, actually. So what we saw is that, very quickly the British government came on board and they said, Rishi Sunak, I was listening to him speak, and he said government support, job support, we're going to support industry, we're going to support wages up to a certain level, right? Singapore said the same thing. Many other countries did that same thing. And that's why people were able to retain employees, if not all of them, the majority of them. The Indian government didn't do anything. In fact, the Indian government didn't provide any support to the travel and tourism industry, which was very surprising. So that is another challenge that we face, right? The Indian labor laws are extremely restrictive. You cannot, once you hire, it's extremely difficult to lay off people. It's very challenging to do that. And the Ministry of Home Affairs actually sent out a circular that during the lockdown phase, we would not be able to terminate any employment. So that was again another challenge that we were facing, right? So multiple issues, no support, travel an issue, cannot retrench staff. Banks were not willing to renegotiate. We had so many multiple issues from all sides. And then last 2 weeks ago or last week, India infected cases crossed 200,000 people. India's now opened up and they said, yes, you can travel, but travel again is so haphazard that if you're flying from one state to another state, you have different quarantine rules. So people are not traveling. So if you go from New Delhi to Bombay, for example, each city has a different quarantine rule. So although Delhi may say there's no quarantine, you come to Bombay, and then suddenly you say, 14-day quarantine, right? You fly from Bombay, you go to Bangalore, Bangalore says 7 days quarantine. It's extremely difficult, uncoordinated by the Indian government. Disaster for all of us. So what did we do, right? So if you go to the next slide, how did we manage our risk and what did we start doing, right? So there was a clear risk of cash flow mismatch. And we worked with the operators. So some of you have asked questions over here. We don't manage the hotels ourselves. Our hotels are managed by the respective brands. We only play the role of investor and asset manager on our assets. So we work with each of the operator to run scenarios. So what's going to happen? How are they underwriting? What are they looking at? At the same time, we started underwriting for the next 6 months. So our internal team started looking at forecasts, started looking at numbers coming out of Southeast Asia, started looking at trends coming out of China. And then we started looking at what the Indian government is doing, and we started working with the operator. And I can tell you that each and every operator that came back with a revised business plan came back with a very optimistic business plan. And we didn't think that's the right direction to go. So actually we went back and we said that's not what we believe will happen. And we would take a very, very conservative view. So we went back into underwriting on a conservative basis. Based on that, we looked at cash flow. Based on that conservative number, we looked at what we need to do in terms of employee retrenchment or reallocation. So that's what we did to manage cash flow. We reworked payment repayment terms, took advantage of deferred payment schemes that for some of the statutory payments that we had to make to the government, we managed to defer payment, or we managed to prolong or receive extension. So we managed to do that. And again, I must reiterate that we have been very cautious in following government. So again, so that's one of the things that we did to manage cash flow. We managed the mismatch in cash flow, obviously. Government orders were very draconian. We went to the court. We said we can't deal with this. The Ministry of Home Affairs has no right to impose how a private company does business. So the Hotel Association got together along with other industry forums, and we went to the Supreme Court of India. The Supreme Court of India came back with a decision that private businesses are allowed to make labor-related decisions as they deem fit to suit their business model. So that's again that worked in our favor. Employee unrest was a major issue. That's something that I would tell you is an ongoing matter. And we have to be very, very cautious in how we communicate with the employees for two reasons. One is that you want to be fair. The second is that you don't want to be caught on the wrong side of the law. So we have to read the law very carefully. We have to take precise and very well calculated decisions. And we have to go back to them, explain to them that they have two choices. They have a choice of going on furlough with minimum wages paid, or they have an option of services being terminated and then employees being paid out as a contract. So we had to manage that, but it's an ongoing issue. We have to, the GMs had to address it, the VP operations had to address it, owners had to address it, and we constantly remain in conversation with our employees. The biggest issue then came to debt default, right? So it's an ongoing business, and you've got cash flow, and you've got debt repayment. If you default on debt covenants, banks are not going to be happy. You get negatively rated. Your ability to raise funds further on becomes an issue. So we went back to the banks and we said, look, we have a problem. We need to work with you. And we actually, with some of the banks, we were able to provide additional collateral, which was already not collateralized. And then they agreed to a standstill with the banks on interest repayments for the next 6 to 8 months. So we have a standstill, it's not a deferment, which is a great help to us. And then we went back to the shareholders and we said, listen, we need to do a capital call to shore up the balance sheet. So fortunately, we are backed by a family office and they understand long-term issues. So they were able to subscribe to a capital call, and that's how we managed to shore up our balance sheet. But a challenging time, so it's very difficult. It's very difficult. Moving on to the next slide. And what are we doing from June 2020 onwards? Right? That's a big question. So as recent as this afternoon, we had another meeting with our operating companies, I said, what are we doing on projecting? How is it looking now that India is allowing people to travel? What are you seeing and what's going on? So I think this is going to be a case where we are going to do rolling projections on a monthly basis. I would say literally, because we have no idea how we are going to manage this. There's no precedent. So where we thought on one of our hotels, which is the Novotel, we actually forecast occupancy for June at 7%, and we're already running at 25%, which is very abnormal. But that 25% business has come from a quarantine business, from a ship that's come in and they need to quarantine their passengers over here, right? So we don't know what's going to happen. So it's totally unprecedented. So we work with and then we work with Hilton, with Taj, with Accor, to look at how the operating processes need to be. So obviously, we were operating our hotels at 78, 85% occupancy. And now we are looking at 30, 32, 33% occupancy. You can't operate at the same staffing level that you used to. Your processes have changed. The way people interact has changed. Along with that, we've established a new manning line. We've prepared a retrenchment plan along with a communication strategy for employees. How are we going to manage that? At one end, you've got to let go of people. At the other end, you've got to keep people engaged and motivated work for you. It's challenging, right? I haven't worked so hard ever than I have in the last 2 months. It's extremely tough, right? And we continue to provide in-house training, keep people engaged, keep them refreshed. We reached out more, so we realized that we need to focus on local community for at least dining, if not room business. So we're building outreach programs to local communities which are around us. We are marketing to the local base. And then, the last one is enhanced cleaning protocols. And I think that's what the world wants now. That's what we are doing. But most importantly, you have to build moments of trust by being transparent in your efforts. And that's the key to retaining, whether you retain consumers or customers or guests or all stakeholders. Without trust, there will be no occupancy. Without occupancy, there is no rate. And that's the path to recovery for us. Build trust, build occupancy, build rate. And that's the direction that we're going to go. Next slide, please. And looking forward, what's going to come out of this, right? What are we as owners discussing internally? What are we discussing with other owners, right? When we talk to other peer group investors, right? So yeah, we are looking at delivery options for F&B, partnering with third-party logistics firms. 6 months back, if you asked me, Hilton or Accor or Taj or any of the big ones, they never looked at delivery as an option. They said, no, this is not something I really want to do. Right? We're going to leave it to the independent operators, and now suddenly that's become a core strategy. But you can't do that without changing your menu, right? So, because menus are meant to be designed to be delivered in a restaurant. They're not meant to be delivered 30 minutes away. So how do you change your menu to make it simpler and make that menu also easy to travel? At the end of the day, if you're ordering from the Hilton Garden Inn in a certain city, that brand is at risk. So how do you deliver the brand promise? Maybe it's Deliveroo, Just Eats, Uber Eats is doing the last part, logistics, but it's coming from you, right? So you're going to manage that. Team building is key. There's renewed trust in this activity. We're relooking at all supply channels and supplier partnerships. So suddenly the Norwegian salmon on the menu at the Taj, may not be there. You're going to go local. So what's happened clearly in this pandemic is that supply chains have been disrupted. And that's a big issue. So whether it's wine, whether it's cheese, whether it's food, whether it's anything else, right? That has a major impact. We're going to relook at everything suddenly to ensure that we have sourcing from more local neighborhoods easier, right? So that's what we are doing on an operational level, right? What are we doing on the management level? What are we doing on the balance sheet level, right? We are looking at different things, right? We are looking at the fee structure, obviously, is it aligned, is it not aligned? How is the management contract going to work going forward? You never have a perfect management contract, right? Hopefully you've captured everything so that when you reopen the management contract, there is some sanity to it, right? That's what we are finding. And also what we found is that, maybe for Hilton, maybe for Accor, the distribution is key. They may not be that focused on management. So a lot of the owners in India and in Southeast Asia are actually discussing, if we own multiple hotels, should we move to a franchise model? Will that work better for us? So we may look at that, right? We have 3 hotels currently, we have 2 other hotels under construction. So we may look at whether going franchise makes sense. I can tell you for sure that all our operators have come back and said, hey, can you give us an exit from a performance test clause this year, right? And we said, no, we're not going to do that because A, this is not defined as a force majeure event in the contract. Secondly, if you have a RevPAR test or if you have a GOP test, particularly if you have a RevPAR test, and you're looking at RevPAR amongst your peer group competitive set, even their occupancies and their revenues are following. So, there's no reason to not stick to a test. And lastly, we are always looking at monetization or acquisition opportunities to redeploy capital. That's what we are doing. So we have an opportunity to exit one of the assets, to buy something more lucrative, which is more accretive to our shareholders. We may do that. Or we may even look at buying something and not necessarily exiting any of these assets. We're looking at all these options all the time. And we can only do that when we have access to capital, a strong balance sheet, and shareholders of the business. So that's the only way we can do it. So really, clearly, our take from this thing is you have to provide leadership, you have to build a path towards recovery, you've got to own the narrative, and you've got to keep the team focused. And you have to be positive. What are the challenges as a leader that I'm facing? I cannot let that out, and I cannot let the others see it. Because that would be more noise, and that would throw them in a panic situation. So every time I have a conversation with my team, with the corporate team, or whether it's the general managers, it's always to keep them focused, it's always to keep them on the path, and always to tell them that we will get through this. So that's really what we've done, right? I mean, that's what we've done. So I think that's probably given everyone an overview of what owners are thinking, how we've dealt with things, how we continue to see things, how we continue to deal with things. Challenging, I can tell you that. We've seen our returns evaporate overnight.
Fantastic, yeah. Fantastic. Look, Mihir, thank you. I think that was really, really great to hear.